A man is haunted by his doppelganger. I discuss this and more on today's episode. Welcome back to Around the Weird, a booktube channel where I talk about all the unusual and out of the ordinary literature that I found in my travels. Today it is Short Story Tuesday, so I want to talk about an intriguing short story that I read recently, one that is about doppelgangers. I am referring to William Wilson by Edgar Allan Poe, which was published in 1839. I've already talked about Edgar Allan Poe on this channel before, so I don't need to go into that great a detail. But he was a writer who lived in the 1800s, primarily wrote horror as well as some detective stories, was really creepy towards women in his writing, and didn't really find a lot of success with what he wrote. But he gained a lot of popularity after his death. So something to consider there. But without further ado, let's talk about William Wilson. I will do a summary, a little bit of analysis, and we will move on from there. So William Wilson focuses, of course, on William Wilson. He is a wealthy but debaucherous man. He comes from a wealthier family, and when he was a young boy, he went to a pretty spooky-looking school. William is essentially recalling his past on some horrific event that happened to him, or that he did to someone else. And this is par for the course with many of Poe's stories at the time. He's going to a mysterious school, and there he meets another student, a horror student, named William Wilson, who looks pretty similar to him, although he's described as quieter, doesn't really raise his voice all that much, and the original William Wilson grows to kind of despise him a little bit. And then as the story progresses, William goes to the dormitory at night and sees the other William Wilson sleeping and sees his face is exactly the same as his and grows to be somewhat alarmed by this and disgusted. And so he decides to leave the school for Eton, which is a prestigious high school or something like that. And he goes through Eton, lives a life of debauchery in the process, drinking wine and stealing from people and doing things like that. But he finds himself being stalked by the other William, who whispers in his ears as he's walking about, covering up his face a little bit, and talking to other people about William's actions in order to dissuade him from doing certain bad things. Eventually, this William ends up in Oxford and is trying to cheat someone at cards when he is when he is called out by the other William again, who has his face covered, William decides to leave Oxford as a result of this, and makes his way through Europe. But once again, stalked by the other William, kind of highlighting all his misdeeds and getting him into trouble in the process. Finally, he ends up at a masquerade in Rome where he's trying to seduce the wife of a very wealthy man. But before he can do so, he is once again found by the other William Wilson, and this William chooses to react kind of violently and challenges him to a duel. They go off to a separate room, and after a big fight, William kills his doppelganger. He hears someone at the door and prevents them from opening the door, and then turns around and instead sees a mirror where he's kind of told, and in killing this William, you've kind of killed both of us. And that's where the story ends there. In terms of analysis, there's a little bit worth talking about with William Wilson. One of the elements of the story, the major theme of it, seems to be that of the duality of man. Poe might be writing about the other William, not in a literal sense, but more in a figurative or metaphorical sense. Perhaps that William isn't actually real, but is actually more of a figment or another part of the William that we know in this story. The other William might represent a propensity for good and morality in the face of the true William's debauchery and just bad actions and stealing and thieving and doing all kinds of heinous things. So like it's just the other side of yourself, what you're capable of, rather than what you're actually doing. So it's a story of debauchery versus ethics, good versus bad, and how someone might feel in kind of facing that. Every time the other William comes by, especially when he sees the other William's face and it kind of resembles his own, our William Wilson feels a sense of loathing for that version of himself. Like he knows it's there and he doesn't feel good about it, so he grows to hate it every time he sees it, because he wants to get away with these awful things, but his conscience is kind of hanging over him, and makes him mad. And I will say that there's an interesting part at the end of this story where this is kind of explicitly said that the other William might not actually be, real, or might not represent an actual physical person. Allow me to read you an interesting quote from this. "You have conquered, and I yield. Yet henceforward art thou also dead, dead to the world and its hopes. In me didst thou exist, and in my death see this image, which is thine own, how utterly thou hast murdered thyself." So, that's just getting at what I just said, where, in killing this other William, you've killed yourself. You've killed a part of yourself, because if you kill the bad side, the good side dies too. Or if you kill the good side, the bad side dies, and you can't have one without the other. A man is a complex creature in that way. The other thing I'll note about this story is there are the usual Edgar Allan Poe Gothic elements. You see a shadowy school described as kind of mysterious in this story, in a shadowy kind of England town. Maybe that's what allows the doppelganger to exist in the first place. There's some murder that takes place in this story, and there's also an unexplainable clone, who might represent more guilt or the pressures of your conscience than anything else. It's certainly one of the first times I've seen a Gothic story that involves a clone rather than just, say, a ghost. That seems to be like the go-to kind of thing for Edgar Allan Poe, but it's a nice change here that I think really adds to the story. Anyway, those are my thoughts on William Wilson by Edgar Allan Poe. It's an okay story. I wouldn't say it's one of Poe's best. In fact, I think the writing of it kind of drags the story down. Poe favors overly large words and verbosity over, just simply telling us what's happening in the story, which drags it down a little bit, in my opinion. But it's still a fascinating story, and I do like what Poe is getting at there, in terms of the duality of man. If that's in fact what Poe is going for, but I do think the writing is on the page. If you have any thoughts on this, or you simply want to, comment, let me know in the comments below. Would love to hear from you. Otherwise, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe so that more people can find out about William Wilson or this author, if they don't already know. And until then, I wish you the best of luck in your weird and doppelganger related travels. Farewell.